have people visiting the reserve. So I'm going to wander around, see what's there, see if anything's come down. If there's anything I can move whilst I'm doing this, I'll do that. If not, we've got some people from some of our volunteers coming down a bit late, and we'll do a tidy up. Hello, David. So just going to turn the camera around. So here in particularly the south of the United Kingdom yesterday, there was quite a strong storm, very heavy winds. Thanks for the burst award, David. The winds didn't get too bad here in London, but they were gusting up to about 65, 70 miles an hour, which is strong enough. So I'm going to have a wander around the wood and just see what, if anything, it's brought down. Check whether there's any safety risks for people who might be visiting, and see what we might need to do to tidy up. So you can see a fairly small bit of come down. So obviously end up there somewhere and come down here. Let me see how heavy this is. Well, no. Okay. Well, if I wasn't broadcasting and get both hands on it, I think I could probably move that. But I'll come back and do that a bit later. It's fairly small, that, but just blocking a path a little bit. So I'll go around the outside of it. And yes, it was one of the stronger storms we've had for a while down this end of the country, and that does make a difference. It's not necessarily a problem for an ecosystem. Taking out a few trees, opening up a bit of light to the surface below is just all part of the dynamics of a woodland. Lots of felled trees, but not so far. I've not found much down, but I've just got here, and certainly across the country there have been quite a few trees taken down, blown down, or otherwise disturbed by a few big storms we've had this winter. And I know this one we've just had, we actually had somewhere in the country, admittedly an exposed island in the sea. We had the highest wind speed ever recorded in Britain, which was recorded at 122 miles an hour. It didn't get anything like that here. And you see just a lot of twigs down, the wind just shakes things and snaps off little twigs. But so far, at least this section of the reserve, not spotted a lot of major stuff down that's going to be a problem, which is good to know. It's a good song. Of course, one of the other things that these big storms can do is they can relocate various bits of wildlife. Rare birds turning up is fairly common when there's been a big storm. That's not a rare bird, that's a mute swan. It's a very common bird. But one of the other things to keep an eye out after this sort of very disruptive condition is birds that have got caught up on the storm front and brought somewhere where they're not meant to be. So one of the common wind systems in Britain picks stuff up from America, drops it, brings it over the Atlantic and drops it here. So we can get, if the winds are in the right direction, quite interesting arrivals of American birds on our shore. And the way the winds blow, it's much more common that way around than for big winds to pick up our birds and take them over to America. So it's always rather interesting. But so far, nothing very serious down, just a few little twiggy, branchy things, which is not a problem. Yep, wind-delivered birds. Get wind-delivered insects as well. Some Lepidoptera are noted for that. That we get insects. That's less common that we get insects all the way across the Atlantic from America, because I think in part because insects are more fragile and in part because they're hard to see and identify. But there are some butterflies that come over, and famously the monarch butterfly, which is not a species that is resident in Britain, but is famed for migrating in America, do occasionally get swept over the Atlantic and arrive here as migrants. And I think there is one species of dragonfly that has, American dragonfly, that's made it to Britain. So, other interesting stuff to look out at. Again, just small stuff down. These are not big trees. This one that's down is an old elm. Well, not a particularly old elm, but it's an elm. And elm's a tree that has, in recent decades, 50, 60 years, started to be affected by a fungus spread by a beetle, and it's called Dutch elm disease, and it means that the elms tend not to get very mature before they die off. And that's an old elm stalk that's obviously it's not living anymore, so it's not got the strength, and the wind just caught it and took it down today. So but so far I'm pleasantly surprised that we've not found much major down here. We have got a scheduled event for members of the Sailboat Society that run this reserve this afternoon to come and have a look round, so we do need to just do this quick check to make sure it's safe. That's a little bit, that won't be difficult to deal with. You can hand saw take this down, but you can see again it's another somewhat larger dead elm, has dropped in the wind and is hooked up here in this large hazel coppice, standard hazel. So this is standing here. It's relatively robust, but I mean that would probably gradually come down under its weight. So you need to get some sleep. Yes, it must be silly o'clock in the morning where you are, David. Well, have a good night's sleep, and I'll continue around with this patrol. This is another elm, and you can see here quite nicely the galleries caused by one of the beetles that buries under the bark and that is spreading this fungal infection. So they make these quite distinctive galleries, and of them, as you can see, and that's just where the beetle larvae have been living away inside between the bark when it had bark on it and the inner wood, chewing away at that, but incidentally also spreading a little infection that causes the trees to die. So that one's down, so that's we'll need doing, but it's a relatively easy job. Hand saws take it off about here so that it's over the edge of the path, and then once that's done and it's safe, we can just leave the wood hanging up to rot, to return to a habitat. You see, since I was last here, the bluebell leaves, these flowers here, have really started to shoot up. Don't think there are any in flower yet. I mean, there should be an April, May plant, but we always get some early. So there's something there to do. There's another little bit of holly down here. Again, this looks like not like a major problem. Let's go and check something here. So people who've been following these broadcasts for a little while might have seen me looking on this tree for a hibernating butterfly before. That seems to have now gone. Possibly just on a warm day it woke up and flew off. Or possibly somebody managed to see it and have a nice tasty butterfly snack for its winter dinner. I don't know. Yeah, so this is a ivy wrapped round another tree. And that, again, is ivy. It doesn't particularly damage trees itself, but it can, particularly when the tree's getting rather old. You can see the tree that was there. I suspect it was an old hawthorn. And that's had the ivy growing up it. And in fact, it just acted like a sail, that the ivy's picked up the wind and acted as a big sail, and just a lot of extra force has just snapped that off and dropped it here. Again, this one won't be a major problem to clear. A bit of hand saw work. Just to make it not be blocking the path for people and to avoid any dangers. But that feels doable. So far nothing that has caused me any major concern about what we've seen so far. When we manage this place as a nature reserve, that's what it is. So as long as the stuff that's fallen or been blown down is not a threat, not a risk to people visiting the reserve, which is mainly stuff hanging over paths, then we tend to we would leave stuff where it's fallen or where it's hanging for the materials to rot down, for the habitat to develop in that way. It creates a difference. I'll show you when I find something from the previous storm that makes an interesting difference in the reserve. We'll get to that. Central clearing. You can see an example of something that we took down, an old dead tree that was starting to look just a little bit unstable and was right here over one of the areas where people visiting the reserve come to sit. So we took the choice of getting that taken down and segmented. And you can see, the bits of what were on that tree there being used as additional seats. But that was one we chose to take down quite a few years ago before it fell down, and because it was close to where people were spending a fair chunk of their time when they were in here. We hear quite a bit of bird song as well. We're coming into spring now. All the birds are getting ready for their breeding season, trying to establish their territories, find their mates. Here's a bit. I'm glad nothing fell over. So this post with a white sign on it is this year's example, something I do every year, where I try to put a fixed point somewhere in the reserve and stick a camera on it about once a week. Take the same photograph. So from here, this year, I'd take a photograph looking out into the reserve, into the woodland this way, and that will give you. That means that what I can do is I can stitch those photos together at the end of the year and get a little sort of pseudo time lapse of the seasons. I am way behind with processing last year's, Just a few things that happened in my life at the start of this year, and I've just been far too busy to focus on some of the regular natural history projects. I'm way behind with that. I'm way behind with pulling together records and sending them into recording schemes. But it's all sitting there on the computer ready to be done. So, not the end of the world. Well, so far so optimistic. I'm not seeing much down. Now, which way will I check today? Let's try up this track. We'll do a bit of a zigzag through the reserve. No, just more twiggy bits down. But I know we've got up here, we've got coming up a bit further on this track, a large ash. It's actually the tallest of the trees that we have in the reserve, and that has shed some of its upper limbs in previous storms. So always good to check that. In part, it's just, I think, because it's such a tall, because it's the tallest tree, it's necessarily the most exposed, and therefore it catches the wind. It does look like something's come down here. Might well be off that ash, actually. Yeah, that's... So, I mean, that's safe, because it's down. Well, I suspect... Let me see if I can point this up enough. That's come off the top of there. And I suspect that means that this ash is no longer the tall tree in the reserve, because it's lost a lot of its top there. Now, there is another disease. We were talking about the elm disease earlier. There is another disease which is affecting ash dieback. So it'd be good to have a good check of this when it's down and see if there is any signs of that disease, or whether this is just the fact it's been the biggest and the tallest tree, so it's been hit by the wind, not been sheltered, and has essentially cracked. It's sort of cracked at around about the canopy level of everything else looking up. Let me point up again, which is consistent with the idea that it's basically the bit that was poking out the top has just been exposed to the wind and fallen. But we will have a good look at this, given it's been brought down, and see if there is any sign of this ash dieback disease on it. Let's have a scan. I'll just go back a little bit and have a scan across. So yeah, this doesn't worry me too much from embers coming in today, the reserve, because this has come all the way down. I'll check that little bit that's propped up there. But as you can see, it's lying flat on the ground. So it won't be a risk of this falling on anyone. But this is going to be a fairly major job. This will be a chainsaw job to get this cleared off the path. Hacking through that with hand saws would be really hard work. But we'll have a look. Just, so we won't take people around this when it's like this, because as you can see, I'm having to be a bit careful in how I'm going. So that's not going to fall down. We will clear that, of course. So yes, I did wonder if this one would come down a bit, and indeed it has. That's going to be quite an interesting thing. As I say, it's I always point out to people this is the tallest tree in the reserve, and well, as you can see now, it's no longer the tallest tree in the reserve. The woodpecker drumming there. So that's rather a shame. I mean, it's not ecologically, it's not a problem. Things fall down, things open up light. The tree won't be dead, it'll grow away again. But there's always that sort of slightly human thing that because it was a special tree, because it was always the tree we said was the tallest in the reserve, we always pointed it out to people and we always said something about it and talked about how old it was, which I can't remember, but Kim, one of our members, has got a sense that it may well be a tree that's as old as, if not older than the wood itself. You always get that sort of slightly odd feeling when one of those things that has an identity rather than just being another tree in the wood has been affected. So far, one fairly major thing down that's going to be a lot of work. A couple of things that we might, if we don't get them cleared before people arrive, have to direct people away from. But nothing that's causing me to worry that we are not going to be able to let our members visit the reserve today. I don't think. But we'll talk with my other volunteers when they're here a bit later, and we'll see. So I'll just check last couple of paths, see what else is here, and then the next little bit of task that I'll do is just walk the fence line of the reserve and check that the status of that is okay. If anything large has come down over the fence, it will obviously have taken that out. And a bit of bark being knocked off, but nothing serious. Now I'm trying to remember if that's come down. I think that's come down as well since. Let's move here so we can see it. So this has been dead for quite a while, this tree. But right at the top of this has also been caught in the wind and come down. You can see off to the left there where it's flattened. But that, as far as I can tell, has come down completely off the path. It's nowhere near where people are going to be going. So that is perfectly fine. It can stay there. That can rot. That can turn in beaten by beetles and dissolve, consumed by fungus and just be generally an interesting bit of habitat. Yeah, that's well away from where people are. And this bit of the track that I'm wandering down isn't one that's regularly used by visitors to the reserve. I use it quite frequently. But if there is something significant down across here, it's less of a problem for other visitors. The fence is a bit dislodged here, but we knew this bit of fence needed some repairing. Might have to do that at some point before the cattle return to the reserve later in the year. But for now, I can just ignore that. Again, lots of elm along here and lots of it dead for the reasons we talked about before. But so far, considering how windy it was, there's nothing here that's concerned me so far for allowing people to visit. Which is good. Don't like to have the place not accessible to our members. So as long as we can do that safely, we'll be open. So a few of my fellow volunteers will be gathering over the next hour or so here to review what needs to be done. I'll give them a quick report and then we'll decide what tasks we've got to do, if any. But yeah, so far, that's been, apart from the sort of slightly human reaction to the biggest tree in the reserve having decided to no longer be the biggest tree in the reserve, it's been a pretty decent situation. I'm not seeing anything that's a problem. And the general shake-up that a storm causes just is just part of the ecology. It's just part of how reserves, how woods are changed, how you get light in, how you get regeneration. So far I'm fairly optimistic, all things considered. And then, yeah, what I'll mention, since I talked about that, I said I would briefly mention this. People from the United Kingdom of a certain age might remember famously a big storm in 1987. This one today, the one yesterday, is probably the strongest storm we've had in this part of the country since that 1987 storm. And that did the similar thing here. It knocked some big trees out of the reserve. It knocked them down, opened up space to light. And this is a cherry tree. The bark structure gives it away. And there were virtually no cherries in this reserve before the 1987 storm. And that storm took out some big trees, and in a lot of the gaps, cherries took over. I suspect possibly cherry stones brought in by the large number of wood pigeons that roost in here, defecated out, and the plants grew away from there. But I don't know, I'm speculating that's why it was. But so, that was an interesting damage. That there was that change in something in the woods brought about by an earlier storm. Be interesting where that big ash has come down. That's going to have opened up a chunk of space and woodland to light, and it'll be interesting to see the extent to which over the next several years that bit of the wood, that dynamic changes. So yeah, well, so far that seems fairly positive. There's a couple of other bits of reserve I'll check, but I'll do them off camera. We've had a bit of a look now, and I'm just heading back to our visitor centre here. Might make myself a quick cup of tea before whilst we're gathering, and then get out, see if I can do a little bit of work clearing some of that stuff that's down. And hopefully, if the weather stays adequate, I'll be back here this evening to do one of my regular moth surveys. So we'll end here, looking out up the reserve, fairly calm and placid, and get on with it. So anyway, a quick wander around the reserve. Anyone who was watching, who was thinking of coming to the men's event later today, we've not formally decided whether or not it's going to go ahead and it's going to be open. It'll depend a bit, but my thinking is we probably will be able to go ahead unless another stormy set of conditions comes in and makes the wood unsafe. But formally we'll decide that once I've talked to a few other people. Anyway, we'll end the broadcast here. Have a good rest of the day.